Welcome to the Global News Podcast on YouTube, where we go behind the headlines of a story and tell you why it really matters. On this episode, we mark a year since the end of the war when a ceasefire was brokered between Israel and the Lebanese militia group Hezbollah. Despite this, Israel has continued to attack targets it says are linked to Hezbollah, which is described as a terrorist organisation by countries including the UK and the US. Lebanon says more than 330 people, including civilians, have been killed in Israeli airstrikes across the country since the deal came into effect. To discuss this and mark a year since the ceasefire began, I'm joined by our Middle East correspondent Hugo Bachega, who's been on the streets and communities of South Lebanon in recent days, talking to people who are affected by events in their local vicinities. And Hugo, you've been talking to us about, I guess, whether the ceasefire can hold and also how people are feeling locally on the ground.
Exactly, and this was a war that was devastating for Lebanon. More than 4,000 people were killed here in this country. We're talking about billions of dollars in destruction, economic damage, and a year ago today this ceasefire came into effect. So it ended the war between Hezbollah and Israel, but the reality on the ground is that the war has continued. We have these Israeli attacks that have been happening almost every day, and this is happening because back when the ceasefire was agreed between Israel and Lebanon, there was some kind of understanding between the Israelis and the Americans that Israel would have the freedom to operate in Lebanon when it identified some kind of threat coming from Hezbollah. And this has been the justification of the Israeli governments to carry out these attacks that have been happening across the country, and again almost every day. Israel says that it is targeting Hezbollah. It says Hezbollah has been trying to rebuild its military capabilities, and the south of the country is obviously the heartland of this country's Shia Muslim community, and it is the heartland of Hezbollah, and it's been one of the places that have been under constant attack by the Israeli military. So we visited some of those hardest hit communities to talk to residents to really understand how they are living under the constant fear of these Israeli airstrikes.
Yeah, it must have been an incredibly worrying time still, because a year on we can say that there's been a ceasefire, but sometimes a ceasefire, as we've often spoken about in the past, they can be as fragile and complex as the paper they're written on, frankly.
Exactly. Well, the concept of a ceasefire is that fire is going to cease, and this has not happened here in Lebanon. And obviously, along the border, those villages that have been heavily destroyed are completely deserted. The Israeli military has essentially enforced a buffer zone between Lebanon and Israel. Israel continues to occupy at least 5 locations in the south of the country, has justified this occupation as saying that these are measures needed to keep communities in northern Israel safe. And Hezbollah has been saying that it is fulfilling its obligations under the deal. Now, what is key here to understand these different versions and claims and counterclaims is that there is a river that runs through southern Lebanon, the Litani River. So this river is about 30 kilometers from the border with Israel. Hezbollah says that the ceasefire deal only applies to this part of the country, and that essentially has the right to continue to operate in other parts of Lebanon. Now, Israel says that this is not the case, that the ceasefire applies to the entire country, and obviously the Lebanese authorities are under a lot of pressure because the new government here has vowed to disarm Hezbollah. So there is a huge effort by the Lebanese military in the south of the Litani River to disarm Hezbollah, and by and large what we're hearing from the Lebanese army, from people who know the situation on the ground, from the United Nations force that is operating in the south of the country, they say that Hezbollah has been fulfilling its part of the deal, and they're not identifying any kind of activity by Hezbollah to try to re-establish itself in the south of the country. Now, the Israelis are saying something completely different. They say that they have identified activities by Hezbollah to re-establish these military capabilities, infrastructure in the south of the country, and there has been a lot of speculation in recent weeks that Israel is planning to escalate its offensive against Hezbollah. So there is, a lot of concern here in Lebanon that we could be seeing the beginning of a larger Israeli offensive against Hezbollah.
Yeah, so you give us a sense and a understanding of what maybe the two sides are thinking and how they're behaving. But amongst all of this, of course, there are people who are living on the ground. And when you speak to them and you've been through their communities, what have they had to say to you, and what are some of their fears and hopes for the future?
Yeah, so despite all of this, Hezbollah remains extremely, powerful, popular in this country. So the group still enjoys significant support, but in some parts of the country where the group has a very strong presence, I think it's fair to say that there is some kind of discontent because of these constant attacks by the Israeli military. So we've heard from a lot of people who are saying, well, look, the group needs to make a decision. We cannot continue to live like this. No reconstruction is happening because Lebanon's international partners have said they're not going to fund any kind of reconstruction until there is Hezbollah's disarmament, or there is a clear timeline for the group to be disarmed. So we visited a number of villages and locations in the south of the country that remain in ruins because no reconstruction is happening. A lot of people are also very tired of this situation because you have airstrikes, you have drones, flying over cities and villages across Lebanon almost on a daily basis. Even in places like Beirut, we often hear, the buzz of Israeli drones flying over the capital, which is far from the border with Israel. So I think this gives you an indication of the volatility of the situation here and how fragile the ceasefire is. Now, it is important to say that Hezbollah has not responded to this escalation that we've seen in the last few weeks because he knows that any kind of response will pave the way for a massive Israeli retaliation. But again, the fear here of many Lebanese is that we could be seeing an escalation in these hostilities, and obviously there is the concern that we could see a wider conflict erupting.
If that is to be the case, then in terms of any international intervention, is that likely possibly in the coming weeks and months?
Well, it does seem that the Israelis are planning to go ahead with some kind of wider campaign against Hezbollah. They are saying that they are not going to tolerate any kind of reinforcement of Hezbollah's positions along the border with Israel. And it does seem that they have the support of the Trump administration. I've been talking to diplomats here in Lebanon who are familiar with the discussions that are happening behind the scenes. And essentially, they've been saying that the Lebanese authorities have made some kind of progress in disarming Hezbollah, especially in the south of the country, but there is this perception that things have been extremely slow, and there is this frustration from American officials that there hasn't been significant progress in their view, and they are supporting Israel's attacks and the Israeli policy when it comes to Hezbollah, and they say that there is some kind of frustration with the way the Lebanese authorities have been approaching what is a very delicate issue here in this country. Lots of divisions. Remember that this is a country that had a devastating civil war based on sectarian divisions, and the president has been saying that any kind of strong response against Hezbollah could exacerbate sectarian divisions in the country and reignite the civil war here. So that gives you an idea of how difficult the situation is internally for the Lebanese. But there has been some push efforts, diplomatic efforts in recent days and weeks to try to de-escalate the situation situation. But again, what we're hearing from from the Israeli authorities indicates that they seem to be planning an escalation of this campaign against Hezbollah.
And then finally, I guess, Hugo, if that is to be the case, then would the presence, the shadow of Iran loom large over this?
Yeah, this is such an interesting point here, because obviously Hezbollah is supported by Iran. Hezbollah was the main, actor in what Iran used to describe as the axis of resistance, which was essentially a ring of fire around Israel, and was considered to be, the main group, to defend Iran from any kind of Israeli attack. That's no longer the case. But a lot of people who've been watching this situation for a very long time say that, well, the Iranians are playing the long game here. They know that they are under a lot of pressure, but they also see as being, a key part of the country's foreign policy and part of the country's strategy to have a very strong Hezbollah here in Lebanon. So when you talk about disarmament, a lot of people say that, a decision about the future of Hezbollah's weapons will not be taken here in Lebanon, but will be taken in Iran. So obviously Iran is a key player in the crisis that is happening here.
Hugo, thank you so much for your time. Hugo Bachega, our Middle East correspondent, joining me on the line from Lebanon. If you enjoyed this story, then do check out our Global News podcast, where there are other world stories we cover. You can find it wherever you download your podcast from. Also, do give this episode a like and subscribe to our BBC News YouTube channel. And please leave us a comment below to talk about this story and if there are any other stories you'd love us to cover in the future. For now, I'm Ankur Desai. Thanks so much for your company.